how websites are created. Okay, first of all, there's two sort of things we need to know. I guess we don't really need to know right now, but let's cover it anyways. There's scripting and programming languages. So a scripting language is like throwing instructions into some sort of machine and it just sort of does what you want it to do. And that's very similar to a programming language. But a scripting language is kind of like putting popcorn into a popcorn making machine and it just like pops your popcorn for you. Whereas a programming language is like being able to program the popcorn machine. Now, we write all of our code in a text editor that satisfies the program's ability to read your code. And that program is your browser. So if we said, right in here, less than b greater than hello world, less than / b greater than in HTML, it would look like this. It would be bold. This right here, this b and this b, tells it to be bold. These are instructions for what your browser needs to do. Next up, you need a text editor. And again, you want one that doesn't add hidden data to your file. So don't use Microsoft Word or anything like that. I highly recommend downloading and installing VS Code. Again, it's free, popular, and very powerful. So if you haven't, I would really like if you could just pause the video here, go download and install VS Code, because we're going to need it at the end of this course. Websites are created when we write code. So writing code is a lot like writing a paragraph. It just looks a little bit different, and we call this syntax. So you can still read the code, and it's like reading a different language, but your brain still understands what's going on. We follow rules that programs like a browser are looking for. For example, if we said b hello world /b or I hello world /I, that's going to output hello world in bold or hello world in italics. What you see and interact with on a website is really only made up of three components: HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. HTML and CSS are considered scripting languages, and JavaScript is an actual programming language. And there are some differences, but honestly, it doesn't really matter what those differences are right now. We can get into that at some point in the future. But pretty much every website uses these three technologies today. HTML files are saved with a .html file extension, CSS files are saved with a .css file extension, and JavaScript files are saved with a .js file extension. And for the most part, that's the biggest difference when it comes to just managing our files. It's just the file extension. As soon as a browser sees that there's a .js or .html file, for the most part, it can figure out what to do next. And we write all of this in a text editor, and we just use different file extensions. Let's look at programming languages. When you hit a website, a server is sending you that HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. But the code that executes on the server can be a completely different coding language. It can be Python, PHP, Node.js, Java, C, etc., etc. It could be really any language, and you're not going to know what that language is. But we also write that code in a text editor. And again, that text editor could be VS Code. Now, one more component that we're not really going to touch on too much in this course is databases. So when you try to log into your website, or any website, your data is sent to the server. So that's the code that you cannot see. We call that backend code. And it talks to a hidden database. And that database is supposed to be hidden to keep your data nice and secure. These databases are what store your passwords, your usernames, your email addresses, which photos you uploaded, which posts you liked, so on and so on. Basically, anytime it remembers that you did something at some point, that's being saved in a database. And a database is really just like the memory of a website. Code you can't see. All HTML, CSS, and JavaScript can be seen by your end users. So never store secrets in there. If you right-click on pretty much any web page and click View Source, or go to, I think it's usually File View Source, you can actually see the raw HTML, CSS styling, and the JavaScript. That's all considered front-end code. And again, back-end code is what runs on your server, and you cannot see it. We don't have access to that. But front-end code is completely accessible to your users. So again, do not put passwords or anything like that in there. No sensitive data, really.